Hi, this is Chris Urbina here. I'm the chair of the SRC. Welcome everybody to our meeting. We're hopefully going to have a good 2-hour discussion today. I'd like to start with a roll call. Tanjing, would you mind introducing the staff and research members of the research team that are on the dashboard today? Thank you.
Absolutely. So this is Tianjin Li, an associate professor in the Department of Ophthalmology and part of the evidence synthesis team. And I'm just going to go through the names on my screen. Muki.
Hello, my name is Muki Richie Pirot. I'm one of the systematic review team.
And Jean-Pierre.
I'm Jean-Pierre. I'm also on the systematic review team.
And Greg Tong.
I'm Greg Tong, associate professor, Colorado School of Public Health, and part of the administrative core.
Ashley.
Ashley Brooks Russell, associate professor, Colorado School of Public Health, and a content expert for the project.
Rosa.
I am Rosa Lawrence. I'm at the Center for Bioethics and Humanities, and I am an assistant on the review team.
Louis.
Hi, I'm one of the review team assistants as well.
And Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Barrow, professor in medicine and public health and on the systematic review team.
Chris,
Great.
that's everyone from the research side.
Thank you, Tanjing. I appreciate it. So I'm now going to do a roll call of the members at least I see on the list as well. Just keeping in mind, everybody, that this is a recorded meeting. Your comments are going to be heard by the public. I can't tell exactly how many public members we have, but at least I see at least 14 members of public. This is an open meeting. And I'm going to introduce, I'll just say your name and just tell us what your role is on the committee. And then we'll take it from there. We'll start with Greg Kinney.
Greg Kinney, Colorado School of Public Health. I'm a research assistant professor and I'm the epidemiologist for the group.
Next is Leslie Brooks.
Good afternoon, Leslie Brooks. I am a family medicine and an addiction medicine physician, and I represent our equity and inclusion feedback on the group.
Great. David Broombaugh.
Hi, David Brombaugh. I'm a pediatrician and chief medical officer at Children's Hospital of Colorado.
Thank you, David. Joseph Chat.
I am Joe Schacht. I'm an associate professor of psychiatry at the University of Colorado School of Medicine and a licensed clinical psychologist.
Thanks. Thank you, Joe. Did I miss anybody that I'm looking on the list here? I don't see that I do. So I think that's it. If people join, just let me know that you, how they're going to know. I'll try to keep a look at the list and just tell people that they've joined the group. So also on our team, Nilu has been very helpful in terms of help jumping in there and helping us put together the agenda and all these and things that we sent to you. So thank you. Does anybody on the SRC have any conflict of interest they'd like to update us on? I don't see any hands raised, so I think we can move on from that. So let's roll through the slides then. You'll see, so let's move to the agenda there, Nilu. So I've kind of given the update, opening remarks, conflict of interest. You see the agenda here. It's a very full agenda. Nilu and I worked very hard to try to get you lots of information, questions, kind of a draft of the Tanjing, and everybody tried to give you a rough draft of the report. So we're going to talk about the questions. We're going to get an update, first of all, from Tanjing. We're going to talk about the questions that I'd like to discuss, at least a couple of them today, if we can get through it. And then we're going to talk about the general plan and draft report that when John joins us, and hopefully we'll have a meeting about our next discussion. Nilu, did I miss anything on that agenda? Okay, great. So next slide. Oh, any questions about the agenda? Does that sound reasonable? Seeing none, we'll just keep rolling through it here. Thank you. So as you know, next slide, on the website, you have a description of all the slides that that the research team has shared with you. You have a copy of all the minutes. You have other resources that are there. So I'm just going to refer all the members to the SRC as well as staff know that that's all on that resources page of the Cannabis Research and Policy Project, circled on the slide. So everybody knows these 13 House Bill 13 expectations, but we'll just walk through them briefly. Next slide. Our charge at the School of Public Health, as John talks about, is we are in the throes of conducting a systematic review of the high-potency THC marijuana. Our Scientific Review Council is currently operating and doing well. And ultimately, as we roll through this, we'll produce a public education campaign going forward. Next slide. You all have seen this slide multiple times. It's a repeat of the previous one with more detail. But the big thing is this yellow highlighted issue, and we're going to talk about that today. They're providing the initial report July 1, 2022 to the legislature as well as for our review in the SRC. Next slide. So just an update, just so folks who don't know what a systematic review, we've talked about this multiple times. We're going to look at all the available scientific evidence-based research regarding the possible and physical and mental health effects of high-potency THC, marijuana and marijuana concentrates, regardless of the location of the research, and that we're going to look systematically curate and synthesize existing research, identify evidence gaps, identify new research that is needed to better understand the health implications of high-potency THC products and the specific THC potency levels and amounts at which various health outcomes or health concerns arise. Next slide. We've talked about these both, looking at both the beneficial and adverse health outcomes, and of course, describe these studies and report adverse effects of exposure to high-potency products. Next slide. So Tanjing, if you don't mind, give us a kind of an update on the progress so far of the systematic or extraction that where we're at. Thanks.
Sure. Next slide. So as you all know, we have extracted data from nearly 500 observational studies and randomized controlled trials with regard to the basic characteristics. And we're in an in-depth extraction from these articles about the association, if they have reported, between the high potency exposure to THC product and health outcomes. So we're in the process of doing that. We have finalized, pilot tested and finalized the data extraction form for that. And then the pace will pick up as we speak. So as of today, we have extracted data from nearly 60 articles. And we have a team of students and methodologists who are helping with that. With the summer, summer holiday for students, so it's a little bit of an influx, and also, people are taking vacation time. But hopefully we will wrap this up pretty quickly. And then I think the next big thing is you have seen the dashboard that Rosa has put together with some example data, and now she has imported the data from those 500 studies. We have extracted the study characteristics, and you will be able to access to the dashboard. And I'm going to turn it over to Rosa, so she's going to show you how to get access to the dashboard and how you can filter out the types of studies you would like to look in depth.
Great, thank you so much. So the version of the dashboard I am going to show you today is a dashboard meant for internal use by the SRC members during the development of the report. This dashboard is going to be developed into the public-facing dashboard ultimately. But as it stands right now, the data is kind of at the same point that the data was when we presented it during the May SRC meeting. So first, I'm going to walk you through kind of logging on to the dashboard, and then I'll give you a quick run through of the dashboard itself. So here, I'll quickly share my screen just to give you a view of where we're headed with all this.
So Rose, a quick question. You sent us some instructions on how to get on, and we have to request, right? We have to request access if we don't already a faculty member. I tried to do that. I just haven't heard any response yet from my request.
Okay, great. So you filled out the form. Great. So we'll keep tabs on that and just make sure that it goes through. It does take a couple of days, but when that goes through, you'll have access. All right, so sharing my screen. All right, are you seeing the full dashboard?
Yes.
Great. So this is what the dashboard looks like, and I'm going to just put the link in the chat. To actually access the dashboard. And if you would like to try and access this while I walk you through, feel free. To access the dashboard, you need to be either on the university network or you need to be on the university VPN. And then you should follow that link and it will log you in through your university login. And then you should see this same screen that I'm showing now. And as you're doing that, just let me know if you have any technical difficulties. Feel free to email me if at any point you have difficulties with the dashboard. But I'll just start walking through the dashboard overall right now.
Great.
So we have 3 tabs, an overview tab, which is what we're seeing right now, a study characteristics tab, and an exposures and outcomes tab. The overview tab just gives kind of step-by-step instructions of how to interact with the dashboard if you ever need to reference something that I talked about today. The study characteristics tab presents the study characteristics for the 489 studies. And then this exposures and outcomes tab presents those original 14 studies that we showed you at the last meeting. So here, just clicking to the study characteristics tab. So here on the left side of the screen, we have the same study characteristics table that you have from the last meeting. And then on the right side is a list of the included studies with a citation, the abstract, and a clickable URL. So you just actually click it and it will link you either to the PubMed or to some other site where you can access the article. And then to refine this table of included studies, you can click any of the study characteristics and it will update the table of included studies. You can click multiple study characteristics if you want to see studies that meet multiple characteristics, and then just unclick your selections in order to remove them from the filters. Any questions at that point?
I was wondering if an SRC member could throw out a particular combination they might be interested in to see, like, so we could click on it and just make sure it can address the question.
So sure, let's go down to study design. How about randomized controlled trial and harm safety?
So now we have this list of included studies. So there'll be 68 in here. And you can kind of mouse through the topics, and also note that the other tables in the study characteristics will update to reflect those studies. So we have 68 studies and it shows kind of here, you know, the author affiliations and then study funding. So you can get a sense of the characteristics of your selected studies.
Now, will it list outcomes? Like if we're looking at a specific, if you added psychiatric PTSD, anxiety disorder, depression, that would just looks like just one study, right?
Yeah, and so this is something important to note. This restrictions on eligibility criteria of the study population is the restrictions on eligibility criteria, not the actual outcomes. So it is the population characteristics.
All right, so just for our sake, there at this point we don't have summative tables yet of outcomes listed under any of these particular major areas. Is that correct?
So as of right now, this dashboard just has those 14 original studies under exposures and outcomes. So on this tab, it has a similar format where you can click categories, and the table of extracted studies will update to reflect those categories. So, if you wanted to look at the 4 studies in 4 observational studies on pain, you click those and it will update this table with the same links, abstracts, and URLs. And then kind of down here, it will have the citation with all of the exposure characteristics that we've extracted from that study.
Okay.
And Rosa, can you say a few words about, we're cleaning up the data, actively updating the data that populates these tables?
Yes, so this page is built off of the data format that we were using for the initial extraction, and some updates have been made to data extraction, including extracting when there is a direct association between exposures and outcomes. So as of right now, this table does not reflect the updated form or the 60 studies that have had data extracted from them, but I am in the process of building that, and we'll update just this same link with the new data when it is ready. So probably in the next week or 2.
Rosa, can I just ask something?
Yeah.
I like how it updates to show you what actually, to show you things that you can continue to drill down with, but it kind of loses the resolution of the things that aren't represented.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering, is there, because if we're looking for holes in the research, we have to know what we didn't see in order to extract that kind of information. Is there, I know that data is still in there. Is there a way to summarize stuff that hasn't been covered, stuff that isn't represented in this search?
Yeah, so I do see what you're saying, like to be able to refine things by excluding categories rather than including.
What was excluded? Because I clicked on government and randomized control trials, and it cut down restrictions to 1, 2, 3, 4 to 5 of them. But I don't know if there's 27 others that aren't represented by that. And that might play a role in us being able to say, here's where the holes in the research are.
Oh, sorry, just to understand a little bit better. So 27 others that do not have government funding, or?
Well, if we're doing searches, if I'm doing searches for, a target and a funding source, and it excludes a bunch of stuff because, it only gives me like 2 or 3 options under, for instance, study design, or 1 option or something. To knowing that there was another option that wasn't represented might be helpful. I don't know how to say that, but that's kind of what, if we're looking for holes in the literature, it seems like by refining all these searches, we've lost the location of those holes.
Yes. Okay. I understand. So I guess for study design, these are all of the searches that are relevant to, or these were all of the categories that were relevant to the studies that are listed to the right. And so I guess it is a comprehensive list. There isn't something that is listed that was an included study that is not captured by the study design. Eventually we'll be adding systematic reviews and case reports, but that is not in here right now. So I guess the way that things that are not grouped well into these categories are captured is in the other category, which Jean-Pierre has been working on kind of refining that other category to make note of what is in there. So yeah, there are no categories that have been excluded simply because they don't have any studies in them.
Okay, I'll word it better later on, sorry.
No, I think it's a good question. I think you've raised that question multiple times at previous meetings, is that, there's things that are absent that we're not aware of, and they've been excluded, whether or not they've been excluded in the studies. So let's keep that thought going, Greg. And when we come back to some of the questions that we're going to try to answer, let's see if we can come up with some sort of recommendation or explanation of that. I noticed that Archana Shestra has joined us. Archana, say hello and tell us what you do, and if you have any conflict of interest updates. She probably stepped away. Keep going then, Rosa, kind of
So that is kind of the end of the dashboard itself. Just if you, as you're going through the dashboard, have any ideas of how, like a table that would be helpful to interact with, or any additions of information, of data elements, just send me an email and I can work on adding those to the dashboard.
Rosa,
Rosa,
can
I have a question.
add to that point? So if you go to, can you click on the study characteristics? So
Yeah.
obviously we have extracted a lot of study characteristics, and everything you saw in the table that we presented to you last time, you know, potentially we could add that any characteristics to the list here to help you to filter out studies. And for, you know, the very first version of this dashboard, we picked what we think are important. But after maybe today, and after you have a chance to interact with the dashboard, tell us what are the other characteristics from the table we showed you at the last SRC meeting you would like to add to the filter to help you. So that will be very helpful. For example, we don't have anything about, you know, the health disparity, health equity characteristics. If that's important, let us know. We will add that.
We actually do have
we do.
those
I'm so
on
sorry.
here at the bottom. So the only thing that is missing from that original table is the location data, but everything else is in there. The other component is like if it's helpful to see crosstabs or heat maps of different variables, like here we have the outcomes and study design, but if it would be more helpful to see outcomes and exposures or something like that, that can be added too.
Thanks for explaining that, Tanjing. I do see that that was not absent. The questions around health equity, age, pregnancy, all those issues that we saw once before on that previous table. That's here, but we just have to click on that. Is that correct?
Right. Yes.
Okay. Joe, you had a question, I see. Thanks for being patient.
Thanks, Chris. Rosa, this is a really nice product. I'm very impressed. I took Chris's advice and clicked on, you know, a combination of attributes, characteristics that was of interest to me. So I clicked, and maybe we could do it here just because to demonstrate what I'm about to say, which is alcohol opioid use disorder in randomized controlled trial. And I was surprised that the study that came up, there was only one, did not seem actually to have been a study of people with alcohol or opioid use disorder. Is there a mechanism for reporting maybe errors in the categorization or the coding that we encounter as we pick through this?
Yeah, that's a great point. As of right now, maybe the best way is to just email me and then we can deal with those on the back end and just check the original reports. But yeah, thanks for checking that.
Yeah, and probably I just found one by chance that was miscoded, but this looks to have been a study of healthy controls, for example, not people with AUD or OUD.
Okay, great.
Good question, Joe. Thanks for looking at it. I think that all of us have to do a dive into it to see what's there. It's hard to see it. All of us have just seen summaries of tables to this point. We've really not looked at the extracts or looked at the studies. So I think that's really going to be our work going forward. Any other questions for Rosa or Tanjing or Lisa? Thank you, Rosa, for putting this together. So as I say,
sorry, Chris, I was slow on the uptake. I was just gonna thank you. I was just reflecting on Joe's point, and that's a great comment. And you know, there may be data errors, that's for sure, but also you know, you get the link to the full study, so also you have to look in the full study, because sometimes, and you probably did, but I'm just noting that because sometimes in the data extraction you actually have to go to the full study, or it's not, you know, in an obvious place. But yeah, any miscoding we definitely want to hear about.
Great comments, thanks. So any other, Tanjing, Lisa, or Rosa, any other updates on data extraction for us? Because I have a question for you.
Nope.
So as I see it, the data team is still working through extracting all these materials, populating the dashboard. So this is a work in progress, as I understand it. And the public will eventually see this, but at this point, this is for internal use only as it's being rolled out, and we're looking at it very carefully, using it to make recommendations for our preliminary report. Ultimately, it's going to be on the website so the public can see this, look at studies, do their own searches. Is that a reasonable
That's
assumption?
correct. Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Thanks, everybody. Archana, do you want to say hello? See if you have any conflict of interest to report?
No conflict of interest. Sorry, there's somebody's family member who got sick, so I have to take over their clinical stuff. So just running around a bit, but no conflict.
No problem. Thank you for joining us. I think we're, Greg and I were just talking about this earlier. Now we're all being exposed. It's our next phase of the pandemic. So we're all struggling with it. I hear you. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, research team, for putting this together. I think it looks very exciting, and I'm interested in diving deeper into the dashboard. Just a reminder for those who aren't up to date on this, you know, our responsibility as the SRC, Nilu helped me put together some questions that I wanted to pose, and later on in this dialogue, we're going to have a discussion at least of the preliminary draft report. And for those of you who looked at it, it's interesting that some of the same questions are there in the research report that we as the SRC have come up with in our discussion. And I took those questions, formulated those questions based on our last minutes, our last meetings. These are things that we've talked about briefly, but now we have to make some decisions. And so I know we won't get through them all today, but I'd at least like to tackle at least the first one. And I think I sent all of you all of these questions. And for those of you who aren't able to come in today, we're ultimately going to have a dialogue and some discussion about these questions, and hopefully inform the research team about what our opinions are. And if we disagree, obviously, if they're saying, you know, we have everything we needed to do and these are our recommendations, that would be a surprise to all of us. But at least we need to have this internal discussion. So here is what I put together. And let's at least try to tackle this first one. So does everybody understand the intent of what I would like to do next in the agenda? Does that make sense? I'm going to try to have an open discussion about these questions. And then hopefully Nilu and I will put together a summary of what I heard so far, and then we'll send it back out to you. So we'll have a rolling discussion about this. John, I see you just joined us.
Yes, I am.
You say hello. And then we're going to jump into our questions. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, hi, everybody, and sorry to be delayed in joining, but I had an important meeting that I needed to attend. And for those of you who haven't seen the news, it was an announcement that I will be stepping down as dean when the next dean is identified. So I think that's gone public today. Definitely not leaving this project. So I'm here, but that was why I'm delayed, and probably as good an excuse as I could have had. So.
Thank you, John. I think you've done an excellent job of being our dean, and we appreciate it. Any comments or kudos to John for his retirement before we move into the questions?
And actually, Chris, not retiring. So I'm staying on as a faculty member, and so I will be here. So,
boy, I was trying to get rid of you, John, and I guess it just didn't work.
Yeah, stuck.
I haven't been looking forward to this day, John. You've been a great dean. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Greg.
Any other comments for John? All right. Thanks, John. I do appreciate joining us. So so far, just to give you an update, we've kind of walked through the dashboard. Rosa and Tanjing and Lisa did a great job of explaining what's there. Hopefully all of us will have access to it. We started to play with it a little bit. Joe and Greg both had good suggestions already in some of the discussion, so that we are there. So again, the purpose of these questions are to just at least internally begin a discussion and dialogue about where we think we are and about our SRC recommendations or consideration. And I know we're not going to be able to get through all of these today. So I'll kind of set a timeline, at least to maybe about 1:15, the next 45 minutes, to talk about these questions. We'll take very copious notes and try to create an ongoing dialogue about these recommendations ultimately. And as we'll see in a little while from John in his preliminary, in the team's preliminary report, the questions overlap. And that's a good thing, that we're both thinking and looking at the data extracts and our discussion so far in a very similar way. So Nilu, let's go to the next slide. So we all know that so far we've seen preliminary data, and we'll be able to go now into the dashboard and begin to look at some of the characteristics. So given the information extracted so far, do we have enough information to make recommendations about the impact of high potency THC on children, pregnant women, communities of color, LGBTQ+, and other populations? Basically trying to assess health impact. Do you think we have enough information? And if you do, then what do you think we can say about that? Any comments?
Well, so all three reports, Washington, Massachusetts, and the report we're writing, have pointed out that we're all using the term potency incorrectly. Can I suggest that we talk about concentration instead of potency during this conversation? Is that a possibility?
Sure. I know that's a question that comes up later, Greg, but I think at least for this discussion, sure, let's talk about potency right now in this discussion.
So the impact of high concentration THC. And I think I wouldn't want to make anything close to a recommendation without looking at more studies than what we have on the dashboard right now. But I think we will be able to, having gotten the data into the dashboard.
So you're saying that you're optimistic that if we look at these studies, that we'll have that at least some of the information?
I think that we'll have indications of where there's missing areas of research regarding high concentration THC products. Yes.
Okay. Other comments? John, go ahead.
Actually, this conversation has just sparked the recognition that in the introductory part of the report that we provided, we actually have not addressed the diversity of populations who may be affected and the impact. And I think actually that needs to be another part of the introductory material. So I'm just sort of pointing this out to our team because we actually need to mention the diversity of populations and the possibility of both different exposures and different outcomes by population group. So and we just need to tuck away that that's missing right now from the introduction to the report.
Good observation, John. I was going to make that observation that we didn't have that, and we don't have that information. So stating that in the report is a good idea. So any other comments? So I don't see any affirmative that we have what we need. So go ahead,
Chris?
Lisa. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to point out, even without data on exposure and outcomes in the characteristics of studies table, there's certainly information on the number of studies that address these subgroups at all. And so that might be important to look at because some have more in them than others. So just to note that we do have that data for all 489 studies.
So, Chris, one more comment.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and just sort of consistent with the mission of the SRC, and maybe to be talked about now or later would be what is the research that's needed And I think that gets to be pretty tough. I mean, to say that we don't have any is one thing, or we don't have much, but to say what we really need to address questions for, particular population groups who may be more heavily exposed, have different access, different products. I think the question of what research is needed is a tough one that sits before all of us, and one that, I think our team will need to weigh in, and probably SRC should too. So maybe, could queue up and see if there's any thoughts at this moment about what would be recommended,
right,
to fill in what's probably just a massive gap.
Yeah, so I think that's really the next question there, John. If not, if we think that there is limited information, what do we think will be that gap that we have to address, and spell it out? I do think that later on in the questions that I kind of summarized here, we ask, what would that ideal study look like? And should it contain, information about children, pregnant women, communities of color, LGBTQ, and other populations? And do we need to call that out specifically, that this information the research has to include data on each of these populations when available? So, okay. Are there other comments about that?
Chris, there's 90 plus studies, at least in our study characteristics table, that focus on subjects less than the age of 17. So that's encouraging at first glance, but I think we probably need access to that interactive dashboard to understand a little bit more about what kind of studies these are. I mean, they're going to be observational by definition in this age group, but how quality are they? I think we need to have a little more information about what those studies look like to be able to understand if we have enough information at this point for kids.
Thanks, David. I think thank you for looking at the dashboard. I think that's really what it's going to take, is each of us, or at least maybe a subset of us, looking at these characteristics and saying it. Do you think that's reasonable expectation of the research team to actually look at these populations and look for summarizing what's available for this? Lisa, I'm looking at you, or Tanjing.
Yeah, well, we'll be collecting the exposure and outcome data for all of the studies. So, we were originally trying to prioritize that by the ones that we thought had the best reporting on potency or concentration, and that didn't really work out so well. So, we are just plowing through them. So we will have that that data for the age groups. And I can't tell you off the top of my head, what the quality of that's going to be. I don't know if Lewis or Rosa or others have any more insight there.
I wonder if we could use your experience, Lisa, with extracting data and realizing which variables we need in order to answer the questions that we're asking, to put together something like the Cochrane Review necessary fields. You know what I mean? Where Cochrane Review has a list of things you must include in order to be reasonable, a reasonable review. And I wonder if, since we've identified these things, and since I didn't see all of them in the other two reports, maybe we could suggest things like that. Like, since you know what you can't find and you know how hard it is to code it, maybe you could help us understand what they should have reported to make your job easier, something like that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, and part of our report is going to have a section on sort of the deficiencies in how exposures have been reported, and also in the outcomes and the link between outcomes and exposures. So we definitely will summarize that. But I think that's a really interesting suggestion, to actually have a list of reporting items, like a checklist, or like the Messier standards that you've been mentioning, that should be in every study. But I think that also gets to Chris's question as to what's the ideal study for the ideal, for the particular question, right? So they may have different elements for those. But I think that would be great to come up with something like that.
And I think it's unique enough that it's a contribution we could really make.
Yeah, I agree. I would suggest maybe we move on to the, the other questions, Chris, you have put together, because I think that will help with this discussion as well when we think about, what the ideal studies will look like for different subgroups of populations. And then, in terms of measurement of exposure and outcome and how you look at the association. So Greg, to answer your question very quickly, I think you will be disappointed by the quality of the literature. You know this way better than us. Very few of them actually reported any association between the exposure and outcome, not to mention, all in different populations and different ways of the association being reported and measured. Yeah.
Great. All good suggestions. We're taking notes. And so we're going to refine this discussion a little bit more. I know I kind of did a shotgun approach to throwing out all these questions. We'll refine this as we go along, but you're right, Tanjing. Let's go to the next question. So again, do we want to call out other population subgroups when we find out, after we go through the dashboard, after we look at the extraction, are there subgroups that are missing? I think we can't answer that question at this point, but that I wanted to put it on the table as a question that we're going to we should make some comment on. So I'm going to turn it over to the next prompt. Thanks, Nilu. Turn it, next slide. So put it up all on the screen. Given the data extraction of the most useful studies that we've gotten so far, and none of us have looked at the complete dashboard yet, do we have enough information, and again, this is a rhetorical question, to make recommendations of observed outcomes, either beneficial or adverse? What are people's thoughts about this question?
I would agree with Greg's comment earlier that I don't think we have enough yet. Maybe if more studies are populated in the extracted data section of the dashboard, we might feel more confident making any kind of recommendation. But on the basis of what I've seen, at least to date, I don't think so.
Okay. Any other comments?
And just one thing, as you're going through the dashboard, I mean, Joe, I thought your illustration was very good because you picked on something you were interested in and wound up with only one study. And so even with a lot of studies, we have heterogeneity in the data. And so that might be interesting as the SRC digs into specific questions, because even though it looks like, there might be 12 studies on a particular outcome, there's only one trial, or there's only one that measured exposure in, a correct way. So as you drill down, the ends might get even smaller. Which I think might be, interesting to note.
So that becomes a homework assignment for all of us on the SRC to actually start to look at, and try to answer this question. Can we make recommendations about specific outcomes, beneficial or adverse, based on the dashboard that we're getting as that's rolled out by the end of it? And it may be that we'll run out of time and we'll be able to say, well, our preliminary insight is this, and I think the research team will tell us that, and we'll have to say, well, we agree with that or don't, and make some recommendations going forward. So I threw this last piece on here, the secondary effects.
Chris, I think I have a comment and Greg does, if we could.
Okay, thanks, John.
Yeah, maybe I'll throw something out that where our clinical colleagues on the SRC could be helpful. We have not examined guidelines for where recommended therapeutic uses of THC cannabis stand. So I guess I'm thinking about pain, epilepsy, potentially GI issues. I mean, I guess one question, we haven't searched clinical guidelines, but are there sources that we should look to, this on the benefits side? Certainly many of the papers that we've reviewed relate to therapeutic indications or tests of therapy, but are there existing guidelines where people have evaluated the strength of evidence in reasonably systematic ways?
For epilepsy in particular, really the only thing is with use of CBD, including Epidiolex, which is approved for certain types of epilepsy, but it's strictly a CBD product. So there's really nothing specific about THC, however, other than the usual case reports and series, which aren't really very good even. But it's specifically for CBD. There is pretty good data when it comes to epilepsy for certain types of epilepsy syndromes.
Can I ask Lisa, do you think that's a role that the systematic review should pick up on, or John's question about just focusing on individual outcomes in the therapeutic basis, or do you think that's been picked up in the systematic review?
We did search for systematic reviews that could have potentially been included in a guideline. But as John said, we didn't search for systematic reviews. And I know we discussed this a little bit at the beginning. To me, the focus, and this is me speaking personally, really wasn't on therapeutic uses of THC, but really sort of harm and benefit and the ratio. So that's, I think, one rationale for why we didn't include the guidelines. And also we excluded the synthetic products, many of which are used for the therapeutic uses. Yeah, I think it's a valid point, but I'm not sure what we would find. So I think, yeah, I think John's right. The SRC is a much better place to address that question.
I guess what I'm asking is for the purposes of at least this July 1 report, is it something that we want to spend some time on as an SRC, or is that going to be a future question that we'll dive into, that question around therapeutic outcome associated with high concentration or potency THC?
Well, I think that's a question for the SRC, right? I mean, what the emphasis wants to be, if it's on the therapeutic outcomes or harm. And I mean, that's one reason we did code the outcomes as we did into those broad categories, because we wanted to get an idea of how many of the studies actually addressed harm and how many addressed therapeutics. And there's actually quite a lot that address harm, as it turns out.
Okay, great. Greg, you had a comment. Thanks for being patient.
Lisa, is there is this dashboard we've created here unique, or is there another example we could look at that kind of drills into a really mature field? I just want, just as an example of you're saying you can drill down till you have 0 studies, and I understand that in the cannabis field. But if I did this in cardiovascular disease, would I be able to drill down that far? Just get a qualitative assessment of what a really mature field looks like?
That's a good question. Tenjay might have an example more in the therapeutics area. The evidence maps I'm most familiar with are in environmental health. And so they're pretty mature, some of the questions, but it's actually a very, very different kind of question than here. But they would include things like animal studies and laboratory studies and human studies that were assessing harm of a chemical, for example. There's a recent one that's come out on looking at association of COVID-related outcomes and chemicals that affect immune response. They just did an evidence map of that, this group. So, I mean, I'd be happy to send around links to some of those, just if you all wanted to look at them.
Yeah, I'd love to see what that looks like. Thanks.
Okay.
I just shared a link to a COVID living network meta-analysis, and you can click through, subset of studies, and actually you can see the analysis results. But again, these are all trials, so they're way cleaner and addressing one single condition. So the literature is very much messier, more messier here. So, but that just gives you some examples of when you do have good quality in sort of input data, what you can get out from these.
Useful discussion. I think that to me that it's kind of out of the scope, at least for now, about looking at therapeutic impact of THC, because we're looking broadly, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa and Tanjing, looking at specifically the relationship of high potency THC or concentration exposure and outcomes, not necessarily if they're adverse or health benefit. If they're high concentration or high potency, that's the relationship that we're looking for. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's pretty safe to say for most therapeutic use, it won't be high concentration or potency. So if there are studies in that category, we certainly have included them. So we're not excluding them on the basis of that. But what I'm trying to say is probably very little on the very high potency or concentration level of THC in therapeutic use.
Although I would probably guess that some of the people that are chronic users or have developed tolerance and use only now high potency concentrations, we'll pick those up in the extract. Is that correct?
If those studies exist, then it definitely we have included them.
Okay.
Yeah, our search was broad for any outcomes, whether they were defined as benefit or harm. So we would get those. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Greg, you had another common question.
Does the data that you've extracted, would it allow you to go down to milligrams? Because what Tanjing said was, once again, we're saying high potency, and potency doesn't change. It's the concentration of the product that's being used, I think. And it would be, if I could say, this study dosed people with 4 milligrams orally,
So
rather
if
than a 14% product that they were smoked,
we collected, well, please correct me, the team members. I think we collected all of that. So frequency of use, duration of use, if they reported, we collected all of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's go to the next question, because I think this is the question that Tanjing referred to, and I don't have any answers to these questions. I just thought it was useful to talk about or begin to talk about that, what would a ideal study to answer these research questions look like, and what would those design attributes be of these studies? I do think, Greg, you started out the discussion in a very positive way of talking about, really defining potency and making sure that we had a very clear example of that and using that as a definition going forward, because obviously we've all seen the heterogeneity of the reporting of the studies that have been extracted. So I think we need to start thinking about what that ideal study would look like and begin to define those most important outcomes and the relationship of dose to benefit or adverse effects of the same outcome. So any thoughts about this discussion or questions?
I see that as a standardization question, kind of because once again, we're saying potency when the potency of THC doesn't change at the molecular level. So if you're talking about how should potency be defined, I think it's how should dose be defined, or how should risk be assessed in terms of dose. Something similar to that. I tried to write around this quite a lot, Chris, and I wasn't able to make it very clear. But when you say how is potency defined, I think you can look at tolerance compared to effects of a specific milligram dose for a specific body weight in people who are naive versus not naive.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's where potency will start happening, because not potency, I'm sorry. That's where the positive and negative effects of taking too much THC should come into play, shouldn't they?
Agreed. I think that's what we're discussing, and how we I sense that, just at least my preliminary view of some of the abstracts that I looked at, is that it never even gets to that level of detail. So that we can actually try to answer that question to inform the consumer, or to create an educational campaign that says, when you are at this level, this is what you need to worry about, because of these are the potential adverse outcomes and not a desired therapeutic level. So
We know,
That's what I'm struggling with. Go ahead.
well, we know some things, and some of Marilyn Eustis's work showed in people with high tolerance versus low tolerance, an identical dose and the pharmacokinetics of milligrams of THC and how they distribute across time. And that's really what the user is going to be targeting. You know, if you're smoking, you expect to have an immediate effect. If you're taking an edible, you're going to have a delayed effect. And that's been articulated nice and clearly. So if you standardize what the exposure is, then you can tell the consumer, here's what you should expect from this method of use of this many milligrams. It won't be qualitative. It won't be what you're experiencing internally, but you can know that within a few minutes or within a few seconds of smoking or vaping, you're going to maximize your blood levels, and that's probably when you're going to feel it the most. Versus the edibles question, where what they said when the industry first started off was start slow and start small and go slow. But if we showed a naive consumer a picture of what the pharmacokinetic profile looks like and explained what we were showing them over time, they wouldn't expect to take an edible and immediately have an effect, and thus take another edible and have harm. So that's kind of how I've been conceptualizing. How do you actualize this into something in packaging or in messaging, like you're talking about, Chris?
All right, so that's a great, thanks for raising those. Let me have David make his comment, and then we'll come back to that question. Go ahead, David.
Yes, I agree with everything that Greg said, and then I would just, condition it on based on your tolerance status or naive status, because I think that's really important for the consumers. And so in designing the study, that just has to be rigorously assessed going in. And either you just stick to a study design that looks at naive subjects, or you somehow stratify based on objective criteria of tolerance. So because I think that's really, really important information for the consumer.
Thanks, David. Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, can I just make a quick comment that this would be a great reporting element for that list we were talking about, Greg, because I can tell you just from the studies we've been looking at that a lot of them don't give you any information on whether, the population was new users or experienced users or how long they've been using. I mean, it's just, a mess, really. I think you'll see that when the final data come in. So that's a preliminary assessment, but that would be a great thing to report.
Go ahead, Tanji.
To add what Lisa and Greg and everyone else has just said, I think we struggle a little bit in our report trying to articulate the sort of the process from exposure to dose to tolerance and to the actual risk, right? So you can imagine designing a experimental study where you measure the dose exposure in the body and what will happen to them short term. But again, here we're talking about not only the short term effect, how long it takes for you to feel high, but also the long term effect. So that requires different types of study to address the long term effect. So I think Greg, absolutely correct, and that's exactly what we hope that we can come up with something to be able to articulate what those studies would look like to answer different pieces of the questions.
That's exactly where I was going next, Tanjin, because I do think that it's important for us as a SRC to have this discussion so that if it doesn't exist in the existing studies, what should it look like? What are those gaps in that research, at least from our either recommendations and gaps in research, or ultimately in the policy recommendations of going forward that people track that data, or people ask those questions, or people are creating an educational campaign that says, if you have not been using, this is what you need to look for as a potential side effect, that kind of discussion. So, all right. And I didn't expect all of us to answer all of these questions. So we are now at 1:05. So let's try to take at least one other question, kind of put it all there. So we're coming back to this issue around that. What are those characteristics of that study to answer the questions that we've been talking about so far? Not only education, but also both avoiding adverse events, but also seeking we're not in a position of making therapeutic recommendations at this point from my perspective, but at least trying to understand, making recommendations to researchers out there or to the legislature about what those studies should contain. So this prompting continues. Basically, we want to further define outcome and spend some time thinking about that ideal study going forward. So particularly, do we want to take the reverse part of this? Do we want to look at those subpopulations that we talked about earlier, youth users, looking at a particular certain clinical condition, i.e. pain or epilepsy, as Archana mentioned before? Do we want to look at that perspective and come up with some recommendations from that direction at all? That's where this question is going. Thoughts? I don't see any questions or comments about that, but so let's keep going. Next prompt.
Right, but Chris, I'll just say one point, but I do think it's worth stating that there may be certain research questions that may be more relevant or important than others. And I think the question of, for instance, of long-term effects, as Tianjing said, maybe we could say greater than 6 months, greater than a year in a certain developmental stage. So thinking about adolescents, young adults, like that's a very important research question. I think we would all agree on that. And one of the challenges is doing that type of research and follow-up is hard. It's expensive to do, but we could certainly define that as a priority to conduct a more ideal study where you're enrolling patients and then following them and not getting their use history retrospectively. So, I mean, I think we should spend some time thinking about what those priorities would be.
Great. I was hoping you would say that, David. I think this is an issue around not only youth, but pregnant women. I think the special populations that are currently impacted, we need to at least make some recommendations regarding what those studies should be in the future. Because I think we miss the opportunity if we don't focus on them, frankly. At least make some recommendations. So thanks for raising that. Greg, go ahead.
David, I agree completely. I think having an avatar example that everyone can identify with, say youth with sports injuries and pain, treating with cannabis versus not. If you could come up with a real life example, as just a single one, then we can speculate on how you could apply that to different populations also. I think it would be really powerful to do that.
Thanks. Good example. Go ahead, Joe.
I also completely agree with David's point there that thinking about my research area, we part of the reason that we know that childhood and adolescence are such important periods for the effects of THC exposure is from animal models that demonstrate that the cannabinoid receptor system and cannabinoid signaling in the brain is profoundly affected by THC exposure during that kind of critical window. I think one thing that would be that I would I would advocate recommending is for some greater study in healthy controls or whoever it is using neuroimaging or those kinds of methods to understand. Certainly we can't conduct a randomized controlled trial of the effects of exposure to these kinds of substances in children, but we can take healthy controls later in life and put them in the PET scanner or that kind of thing, and perhaps understand better what is the effect of very high concentrations of THC in these products, and does that differ from lower concentration products, for example. I think that so kind of a bridge between the preclinical literature, which very clearly demonstrates these effects, and the human literature where we really have no idea is something that's really lacking.
Thank you for raising that, Jill. I think that is right. I would agree with that. So let's jump. I'm going to jump ahead, Nilu. Jump through the next couple because I think it's a repeat. Right here, let's go to this last question that I heard from a couple of you about the evidence, the type of evidence, either using the FDA guidelines or the WHO evidence decision framework. And I think Greg mentioned another, the Cochrane review in terms of the quality of studies. I think I heard you say that earlier, Greg. Can we spend a little bit of time talking about this question that was raised at our last SRC comments about it?
I think not reinventing the wheel is a good thing. That's a serious comment in support of taking an existing framework that's proven to work and applying it to this literature.
So when we when we're going to make a recommendation for an ideal study, or studies or a specific population, adolescents or young people, requiring these kind of evaluations of these studies, or at least the expectation that this rigor is applied.
Or at least have a conversation about it to say this study can't look at health equity, but it can look at societal implications or something like that. But at least if you address a standard set of evidence from this framework, it would help to standardize literature going forward, I guess.
Okay. Other comments or thoughts? I know you raised this issue, David, at our last meeting. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just getting through this WHO statement. I mean, I do, again, feel like after we review this, we may be able to have more urging caution around negative effects versus being able to clearly demonstrate benefit. My guess is that's where we're going to wind up. And I think that's okay.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Well, this is not the last time we're going to revisit these questions. I do think that at least as we go forward and looking at the dashboard and then looking at the report that John is going to discuss next, I hope we keep these questions in mind and keep all of these comments and at least some of the discussion we've heard today as part of our recommendations going forward. And they may be consistent with what the research team, thanks Lisa for coming. I appreciate your comments today. But keep these in mind. I don't think we have to have all the answers. I wanted to start this discussion at least. Archana and also Paula challenged me to come up with some questions that we wanted to talk about. So these were those questions. So this is what I heard. So let's, any last comment about these questions? I'd like John to kind of review the status of the report at this point. Any other comments about these questions at this point? All right. Seeing none. John, do you want to kind of walk us through what you sent us?
Sure.
Report, please.
Sure. Actually, Neela, why don't you put up the report with the outline? And so, I know we all know we have a time crunch, and so part of our thought on the report was that we would try and finish off sections and provide them to you for review as they are developed. So the actually, yeah, let's just look at the outline piece. Yeah, good. And so there's an overall outline, of course, and we provided a relatively finished version of the introductory material with places where there's some questions to be answered. Actually, in terms of where we are, and again, this goes back to future meetings and what we can provide, the portions of the report describing the methodology, the approach, and the initial results, particularly those related to the characteristics of the almost 500 studies, are far along, and with some cleanup, we should be able to provide those to you pretty soon for discussion on the 15th. So this is all in the works. I think moving on down the outline, if you go down to discussion and then the recommendations, that's where things will get a little more challenging in terms of the timing. I'm sorry I missed the initial 30 minutes, as I said, but we expect to have, amped up extraction of results with the students taking this on. So we should have more studies with results related to exposures and outcomes to provide. So at some point, as we write the report, perhaps in 2 weeks, we'll have to sort of freeze the database at that point and say, here's where we are. And that's supposed so you have an opportunity to explore at the SRC, and the study team does. So, again, in terms of what we'll be providing to you to review, we certainly want to do this section by section, so as we can set some things aside as we, get towards the recommendations. And so that's sort of our planned general approach to this process of giving the report for you to review. And that first piece, relatively finished text, came to you on Monday. So let me pause and see if there are questions or comments sort of about this general approach and what we intend to do. Okay, I'll take silence as no questions. And then maybe Neela, let's go on then to the further down the report.
So John, let me ask you this question. So, I had a chance to, I did look at the preliminary report, and the introductory remarks seem pretty standard and straightforward, other than the caveat you raised earlier. A description of the characteristics of the study would be useful, of the studies would be useful, adding particularly the heterogeneity of the characteristics would be useful. Right. But do you envision that we have general comments and feedback as you're writing this? Do you want written?
Yeah. Actually, we will. Well, I think going back, we would like comments section by section from the SRC, and I think we can go through what we have, which is where Nilo is right now with these slides. But we've described the background where, as you point out, some of this is quite straightforward. I mean, saying here's what HB 1317 asks us to do, and if somebody spotted an egregious sentence, we would certainly welcome feedback. But then there's some of the conceptual framework we laid out where we do want comment. And again, given the SRC's charge to review the report, we do want comments. And I guess, Chris, you're raising a question we should probably resolve, which is, and for general discussion today, what is the right form for those comments?
Right.
And is it, people, and do we want, let's say, a written trail of what comments have been provided along with our responses, which maybe perhaps is the best way to do this. I mean, you and I really haven't had a very specific conversation about this, and we should probably just do that now in terms of what we think is the best way to proceed. So clearly we want comments on all the pieces of the report. We thought that by providing sections of the report that are reasonably self-contained and that are complete, we could solicit your comments with an opportunity to sort of continually revise and refine the report over the month. So that would be a hope. And then I guess the question is, what's the best way to receive them? I mean, sort of in the world of reviewing reports, typically you would get back written comments and we would provide a record of what we've done that might be so simple as saying comma added, or as complex as saying, we've rewritten this to take account of the conceptual concerns of the SRC as follows. So, I mean, I think ideally we receive your comments in a formal enough way that we can respond to them. And given that we haven't sort of gotten there yet, I wonder if anybody else on the team wants to weigh in on this, and certainly the SRC we should hear from.
Go ahead. Any comments? I mean, would we want to provide written feedback on the sections that John has given us already? And then his responsibility would be, and the research team would be, we accept that or don't. And this is what we fixed. Because ultimately, if we have a disagreement, then that should be brought back to the SRC and say, do we disagree with this conceptual framework or whatever? I don't see that in the first introductory pieces. I see it more in the recommendations,
Right.
likely. What are people's thoughts?
I think tracking comments and responses is important. I've made comments on a document that I have, but if I send that to you, Chris, would you want to create one full set of comments that's written in a more formal way, maybe?
Sure, I think that would be reasonable. I would say at this point, let's send it to Nilu, and Nilu and I will create either a Google document or something like that so that people can see track changes and comments from folks, because that would be reasonable. And it's not adding a comma or changing the to an A. It's really, I think, substantive comments about content. I think that's what I hear you saying, Greg.
Well, the other thing I want to say is, as John pointed out, there are sections that you have seen already, like the introduction and then the approach to the systematic review. So hopefully there will be relatively smaller suggestions to those sections compared with the recommendations and compare with the sort of theoretical framework that we put out there that we really want your feedback on. So I wonder what would be the best way to manage that. And then in addition to that is, it's a working in progress. So we're updating that document on a daily basis as well. And we would like to minimize the rounds of feedback and revision as much as we can, so that we, by the end of June 30th, we'll have a complete and report. So I suppose we will need to talk a little bit about the logistics, maybe offline, but not at this meeting.
Yeah, I have difficulty seeing us debating unless there is a substantive conceptual issue that we could talk about, saying yeah or no, like we've done in a consensus statement. But John, when you've worked with other larger groups like this, what has worked best?
Well, yeah, so I'll raise a number of things. So I think there's the issue of, I think, documenting the SRC feedback in the process. And so I think I'm in favor of probably provision of major comments in writing. I think if Greg has scribbled a whole bunch of ideas for improving wording and things, we would welcome those. But I don't think that, that you could compile all that and send it to us. Nilu can help out, but I don't think that needs a formal response. On the other hand, if you suggest that we should, I'll take an example that's already come up, scrub the word potency and use concentration, that would demand, I think, a written response as to why we do or don't do that. So and that's a good example of a real substantive comment and exactly the kind of input that we're looking for on this. Because we've, as Greg noted, CDPHE and Massachusetts, following CDPHE, have acknowledged that there's a real definition of potency, but in this context, here's how the word will be used. We have an opportunity to say, well, okay, let's not repeat that, but for the moment we have. So that's the kind of thing I think we should be discussing at this point. So I mean, I think if we received, a summary that said SRC met, and here are the 4 major comments on the introductory pages, we would take those and we would formally respond. So there's a record for that. I will say that, I'm involved with many reports that receive extensive peer review. A report for the National Academies, for example, might have 15 different reviews. And in the academy world, every comment gets a number and a response. And so you can imagine 100 pages of comments, and a document in the end is 200 pages with the responses. I don't think we need to be at that level of detail, but I think my suggestion would be, and again, just throwing this out, that we come away with major comments and talk about how we responded to them.
So if folks, does that sound reasonable to folks? So let me restate that. If we could, as we get through these, you send us these pieces, if we could get written comments and address them to Nilu at this point and myself, we will try our best to try to summarize the concepts, the generalized concerns raised by the larger group as you review these documents, and then bring them up to our next SRC meeting to kind of have that discussion around those points. Does that sound reasonable to folks? Kind of a show of hands. I see Greg's head shaking. Joe, sounds good. David, okay with you? Archana, Leslie, you guys good with that? Joe? Okay. Okay.
Chris, part of the reason for doing this, I'm sorry, part of the reason for doing this is because now we know that all the other states are reading what we're writing, and we're reading what they're writing. So I mean, not reinventing the wheel again, of course, and showing that we're all building on each other's work, I think shows that it makes a better argument that science is trying to do this work in a good way.
Well stated, Greg. I do think we are moving this forward, and I think making those decisions in a reasonable and logical way is the right thing, right approach. So great. Other feedback for John. I know not everybody has a chance to look at all the state reports nor look at this preliminary report. I realize you're all busy, but I wondered if we could make that request to look at, one, the reports that we've received so far, two, to look at the state reports from particularly Massachusetts and Washington State. I think those were useful because obviously all of you have read the Colorado report. And three, begin to play with the dashboard. I think looking at, like we started to do with Rosa, if you can all start to look at that with keeping these questions in mind that I've kind of posed on the table, thinking through, some of these recommendations, studies with gaps, what research ideal study would look like, what are the recommendations we'd make, not only for the research team, but also if our SRC recommendations could be different. Could I ask the SRC to kind of begin to do that prior to our next meeting? Reasonable? I see lots of head shaking. Good. That sounds good. All right.
One quick comment in terms of what we could provide. I mean, certainly there's what we have provided. Well, I think after discussion, they add another section, but we also will be providing that other material through some of the results. So
okay,
that will be there, and we'll hopefully get that earlier. We did have if we could go there, Neela, the comment where we had put the piece in the report on the conceptual framework, where we have a comment and question. Yeah, so this is the material where we, I think, are particularly eager to have feedback. And this is this complicated question of dose measures that is important and how this is modified by tolerance. I don't know, Nilo, do you have figure 1B on a slide?
No, but give me one moment. I'll pull it up.
So we tried to set this out. So so first there's this conundrum of terminology that Greg already alluded to, which is that everybody acknowledges definition of potency. I actually quoted the FDA definition of potency in the draft text. And they say, okay, well, that's potency, but in common parlance, including that of the legislature of Colorado, I think, potency is really being used as a replacement for concentration. So I mean, I think that we can acknowledge, and then we have these other determinants of dose. So this is a figure that was in the protocol that we've now modified a little bit, in part through interaction with the SRC. So this says that, you know, there's characteristics of cannabis products that are important, percent THC or milligrams and types and how they're consumed, of course. And then there's going from products to what gets into the body and, let's say, is reaching critical receptors, frequency of use, duration of use, self-titration, pharmacokinetics, route of administration, all figuring in. And then in terms of the health effects, the second blue arrow, then those go to health effects that might be construed as adverse or beneficial. And then a number of factors figure in there in terms of modifying the response given the dose. And there we listed age, individual characteristics, that could be many different things. We put in, and this again, we've modified the figure after the last very helpful discussion, and put in tolerance. And then we talked about potential interactions with other cannabinoids and have this figure. So this is sort of the conceptual figure, and then there's text going along with this. And getting this figure right is really important then to how we interpret the evidence later on. We of course have variable data on these different factors in the literature, which will be a problem. But I think we would really like to have, you know, good probing comments about this and the related text. You know, our particular subject matter experts, Sam and Ashley, have put time into this. We've all looked at it. We've read these other reports that have also grappled with exactly the same issue. So this is one where the SRC is, you know, really well positioned with your breadth of expertise to comment. So that we want.
Okay. I think that's an additional charge. And I don't necessarily think we need to, I would say we don't talk about it today, but I think what you're asking specifically of the SRC is to have written comments or improvements or clarification of this model. Is that correct, John?
That's correct. I mean, I think because this is going to be really important. And, you know, I think following Greg's comments on terminology, you know, what is the right term to use for, you know, how much THC is in a product? You know, I mean, there, and I've grappled with this in other contexts. I'll give you an example in a moment, but do we use potency, albeit incorrect pharmacologically, or do we try and make an adjustment? I've gone through this with masks, you know, where an N95 or a KN95 is not a mask, it's a respirator, but everybody calls it a mask. And if you say it's a respirator, then people are confused because they're probably thinking of some big thing that goes on a face. So, you know, there are these problems of communication that we also need to think about. So,
Well, yes, I think defining it and interpreting it is one, defining it is one, and then interpreting it is another. I think that I look at it through my lens, and I assume that potency is the same as percentage of THC as opposed to milligrams. So I'm equally as confused. So. All right, thanks. That's the expectation. I think people hear that loud and clear. Let me just summarize then. So far, we had some preliminary discussion of the questions that I heard from the previous SRC meetings. We kind of began to at least grapple with some of those questions in an open format. We heard where we are regarding the extraction, and we got a good, nice presentation from Rosa and Tanjing about the dashboard, and we all know how to look at it now. If you haven't got access, Rosa says contact her. We want you to play with it. We want you to look at it. And I think that's the only way we're going to make this work. And then I also heard that we really, from an SRC perspective, we want people to play with the dashboard, begin to look at the preliminary report, begin to make comments, send those to Nilu, and we'll do our best at summarizing those comments. And we can, if there are principles or core concepts, we'll bring those up at the next SRC meeting. Hopefully people will have a chance to do both or all three, and then begin to look specifically. John asked us to look at that flow chart, to look at specific comments about that diagram so we can get that correct. Is that an accurate summary? Did I miss anything?
Sounds good.
Okay, good. All right, so I have a request, and we have a meeting next week, the 15th, which is a Wednesday. What time is that, Nilu, our next meeting?
The next meeting is going to be on the 15th from 12:30 to 2:30.
Okay, good. So we have that meeting scheduled. We had talked about having another meeting, and we came up with a date, and that date is the 21st, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
21st, is it 10 to 12 or what? Remind me of the time.
That's correct, 10 to 12.
Does that enough? I mean, do we have, I mean, we'll obviously we have to post that on the web now, 2 weeks ahead of time. Will we have enough information and data that we'll have some more of the review document and maybe some concepts that we'll need to discuss? Is that all we need to do? And can people make that meeting of the 21st?
So Chris, one comment. I'm sure we're going to keep having more and more for you. So
Okay,
that we're confident. And the other issue is, if we're going to do the 21st, we actually need to decide now, because we have to give the 2-week notification. So.
Right. So can I just see we're going to have our meeting next week on the 15th for sure. For those who can't make it, obviously written comments are encouraged. You're going to start getting pieces of the document, as well as you've seen the discussion, raised questions. Always you can send those to Nilu or send them to me, and we'll summarize them and bring it up at future meetings. Let's see a raise of hands here. Can people make the 21st meeting? That's a Tuesday from 10 to 12. I see Greg, Joe, Archana, David's good. We have a less than a quorum here, but we'll put it out. So at least the folks on this board can make it. Us five will make all the decisions for everybody, right? No, I'm just teasing about that. Okay, well, let's keep that. Nilu and John, let's keep that meeting on the 21st, and we'll see how many people. I know Erica couldn't make any of those meetings, so I may have to communicate to her directly. But for those, we'll do our best to try to include people on those meetings. And at least next week, if there's a final meeting we need to have, we'll bring up that discussion at the end of the day as well. So, all right. Any other comments or things that I missed, John or Nilu, that you wanted to raise?
No, we're certainly appreciative of the ongoing input. It's been very helpful, and I think at this point, it's going to be a little more intense than things have been, but, we'll try and give you things with enough advance to really plow into them.
Great. Thank you, John. And thank you to the research team for working so hard to put all those extracts and information. I'm really looking forward to looking at the dashboard. Any other comments or questions from the SRC? Great. Thank you, everybody. Good meeting. We'll see you next week.
Thanks to all. Thanks.
Nilu, can you